Welcome to the Rig Run Recovery Zone. Today we're delighted to welcome Alison Cuthbert, who has over 10 years experience within CBT and is an accredited CBT therapist. Alison today will be delivering the first of our 4 sessions, and today's topic we'll be discussing is the challenge of managing an offshore lifestyle. Lovely to see you, Alison, and over to you.
Great. Well, thank you very much for being here. I think the idea of a podcast is really nice to hopefully encourage discussion amongst us. Welcome, everybody. Just a little introduction. I'm, funnily enough, an Aberdonian myself. And as Katie said, I've been working in CBT for about 10 years now. I suppose you might need to know what CBT is. I don't know if you know, Katie, if you've had any experience of CBT. It's a really great therapy. It's a very practical based therapy. It's a therapy that we probably find ourselves doing on a day-to-day basis when we don't actually realize it, in that you might get out of bed one morning and think, oh, the day ahead, not looking good, that meeting, not looking forward to it, and so on. But as we say in Scotland, we sort of gird our loins and we get on with it. We sort of motivate ourselves. We maybe think about what we might do at the end of the day as a reward after this busy day ahead, and so on. And we usually get going with things. So it's a sort of mindset. The cognitive bit stands for how we think about things. And the behavioral, CBT behavioral, is obviously how we behave. In CBT, we look at how we interpret events. So CBT, it's a sort of mindset. It's how we interpret events, and how then those interpretations make us feel and then want to behave. Okay, so it's a great therapy. And I work with kids, I work with families, I work with individuals, I work with all sorts of people. So it's great. It's really great. And I guess my work with the offshore workers, possibly because I'm based in Scotland. I have a clinic in Edinburgh, but I'm also based up in the northeast. And I guess just, geographically, there's a lot of oil businesses based up here. So if they have workers who are needing support, I'm probably one of the people that come up as somebody that might be able to help. And it's been an absolute, it's been a real learning curve for me to work with offshore people. I mean, I've worked with people as far away as off the Falklands, which is quite challenging, obviously, with timings. And I've worked with people off Africa, people out in the North Sea. It's been amazing. It's been amazing. And I've learned a lot about working offshore. And one of the things I think is, wow, the people that do these jobs are fantastic, because it does sound pretty challenging, which is how we come on to the challenge of managing an offshore life. So shall we? I've got a few things that have come up with clients over the last few years working with them. So I thought I could bring those up, and hopefully they'll relate to others out there. There may be things that are different for other people, but on the whole, these are some of the things I would say on the whole that have come up more than others.
Super.
I think the first thing, Katie, is, well, actually, sorry, I think we were meant to start by saying there are also some really good things about working offshore. Yeah, I think that would be helpful to start there, rather than the issues of how it's disruptive, because I also think that there are some really good things about working offshore. I mean, the jobs are super interesting. I think some of the jobs that the workers do offshore are really, they're very interesting and rewarding. and give people a lot of satisfaction. Also, the offshore bit really works for some people. It really does work for some people, in that, I've got clients who've worked offshore for years and years and years, and they love it. They love the fact that they can come back for chunks of time to be with family, friends, go off on holidays, and so on. So, and being able to take kids to school. Again, lots of them. My husband was an office worker, never ever took the kids to school because he had to be at the office before the school run started. So, there is a lot to commend it.
And it gives you a bit of a balance as well, doesn't it? You can be a bit more involved in family life with the shift patterns, but I suppose the trade-off is that you're also, away for long periods of time, which is in itself challenging.
Yeah, exactly. So on that note, being away from long periods of time, I think that is something that some people do struggle with. It can all tie up with what's going on at home. I remember seeing a client who was particularly anxious about being away from his pregnant wife. It was their first child, and he was quite far away. It wasn't just an easy flight home if he needed to get back home. And I think that left him feeling quite vulnerable and anxious and worried for her. As with all these things, there was no need to worry, because his wife and again, he managed to work his shifts so that he was home easily in time for the birth and so on. And of course, they had a beautiful little boy, and all was fine. But I think, during that time, it was quite tough. He would go off thinking, gosh, I hope she's going to be all right, and so on. And she was well supported with her family. I think, again, it depends what your own family circumstances are. I think if you leave behind family that are being well supported, then it's a comfort to you. But sometimes that's not the case, or sometimes there are disruptions at home that maybe you are concerned about, and you've got to leave it all behind. And again, for some people, that can be quite hard and make their time away really quite an anxious time away, because they're worried about what's going on back at home.
Yeah, which is completely understandable as well, isn't it? I think it's kind of only natural human nature, isn't it, that it's difficult to leave your family behind at the best of times without, potential disruptions or issues going on that you're not there to support.
Exactly. And I think the other thing too, and again, clients reported, they're away for 2, 3, 4 weeks, whatever the shift is, and it's really tiring offshore working. It's 12 hours on, 12 hours off, and it's relentless. And I think sometimes the workers offshore underestimate just how much it's taking out of them, physically as well as mentally. And certainly family onshore probably don't quite understand either what it's taking out of them. And one client in particular, I remember, he was having a particularly challenging time offshore. The shift was quite hard going. The work was quite hard going. I think it was, winter time, so weather, helicopters on, off, and all this sort of thing. And he got back home one time, and all he wanted to do was put his feet up and watch the telly. And his wife said, no, quick shower, come on. And then, dressed up, we're off to the party. And my client said, honestly, it was the last thing I felt like. But I had to do it. Everybody was looking forward to seeing me. And if I hadn't have turned up, my partner would probably not have forgiven me. So it was that sort of really going against what they needed to do at the time. Yeah. And again, you can completely understand that, scenario,
Yeah,
because everybody's
absolutely.
excited about
Yeah.
seeing kids as well. Daddy's home, mummy's home, yay! And
I know, and
actually,
everyone
they're
goes,
just feeling
"Oh,
completely
daddy's
spent.
home, mummy's home." But actually, yeah, I think sometimes it's thinking about what the other person needs, isn't it? Which I think we're all
Exactly.
guilty of in day-to-day life anyway. But yeah,
100%. 100%. And again, another client of mine who did knew what he needed, and he loved his cycling, and he lived in a place where there were lots of places to go off and do that. And he knew that it was the right thing for him to just bring the system down again, but he also felt quite guilty about it, because he knew that he should, I should be at home. I should be at home. I should be around. Even though actually what he wanted to do was go away for a day and, cycle in the hills to
yeah, and it
just clear his
possibly would
head.
make him a better partner, father, whatever, having had that time to step away and just
Absolutely.
kind of reground himself.
Absolutely.
But it's allowing
Absolutely. And
yourself
I
to
think
do it, isn't it, sometimes?
it's a really good word, and we will use that word quite a lot later on when we think about some of the other when we look at some of the other podcasts. I think that's a really good word, allowing yourself. Absolutely. I think another thing that to be considered is, again, if you're doing 3 weeks of night shifts, for example, again, to come home and slot straight back into life is probably unrealistic, given that your time clock is completely changed. 3 weeks is a long time to be getting up every night and doing that sort of that shift. So you might wake up at very odd times of the day, night, and not be all there for the family for maybe a week. And that's a week of your precious 3 weeks at home. So again, all these things need to be considered. These physical adjustments and so on. That's the sort of the personal thing. The other thing, again, on following on from that, sort of the sort of psychosocial behaviors. Okay, so what do I mean by that? I mean by when we are offshore in an environment that's very much professional and we're working, just that's what we're there to do. And there is time off, of course, where you go to the canteen or you go to the gym and you do your bit, or you watch your movies and you have chats. I mean, everybody is there to work. That is what it is all about. And I think it's probably a very different environment from home, in that it's quite a rigid environment, it's quite routined. And I guess as well, because of that, you just get set in that way. And you don't have to think about, well, you have to think about your colleagues depending on the job that you're doing. But again, you're set, you're just up and onto the job, do the job, finish the job, rest, and do it all over again. So I think just thinking about that routine and thinking about how you just have to get into that zone of doing your thing on a daily basis or a nightly basis. I think, again, coming home to a much more flexible routine, or having to be more flexible and having to consider others, having to consider others' lives in what they're doing and how they might be feeling and so on and so forth. I think, again, that's something that can be challenging for some people, when they're used to looking out for number one, i.e. themselves, every day for 3 weeks or 4 weeks, and then to come home and have other people to consider. That can be quite challenging.
It's a kind of transition period again, isn't it, of kind of getting yourself back into the rhythms of being, of being in a different environment.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I suppose again it goes back to, once, you're stepping through the front door, and it's not as simple as just flicking a switch and being back to, the person who lives at home. You've got to allow yourself the time to transition.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So that's on that sort of relationship sort of side and so on. And the kind of, if you like, the sort of more mental side of things. The other thing I want to look at just briefly at this stage is the kind of shift work patterns and how actually that affects us physically. And we touched on that a little bit. But the shift work that people do offshore seem to be pretty brutal. And I say that that's just how it has to be. There's no point in, 5 hours. I mean, it would be a nightmare, I guess, if they had to do it. And they must have tried it in all sorts of ways. And this is the best way. And it seems to me that certainly the people I've worked with, it's 12 and 12. Is that your experience?
Yeah.
So it must be tried and tested. But I mean, it's very different from other types of shift work that we would see onshore. And shift work patterns is very, very different. It's so working, working for sort of 12 and 12 for 2-3 weeks, or maybe even 4 weeks at a time, that can really upset our circadian rhythms. That, and a little bit of scientific stuff now, but not too much. But it's quite interesting to understand it in a little way, because it does affect our emotions and it does affect how we're feeling about ourselves. But as you probably know, a circadian rhythm is the natural cycle of our sort of physical, mental well-being in 24 hours. And it's light activated, weirdly, which is why when we live in Scotland, we find it quite difficult in midwinter when we've got very little light around. Some of us have what we call the SAD, seasonal affective disorder, because the circadian, the whole body gets a little bit confused. Now, if these circadian rhythms do get disrupted by the likes of shift work, it affects our internal clock, and the internal clock is operated by a part of our brain that's very much involved with our emotions, and it in particular, there's a part of the brain that we call the autonomic nervous system, and I'm not going to get into too much detail, but it's the one that deals with all the automatic stuff that goes on, like the heart and the breathing and so on. But it also is responsible for our fight or flight. You've probably heard of fight or flight, remember?
Yeah.
Your biology back in the day. And the fight or flight, this evolved. We'll go on, we'll look at it in a little bit more detail when we cover anxiety. But it is, it's the part of the system that evolved through all the ages to keep us safe. It's a funny one, because it's a system that can make us feel really uncomfortable, but is actually there to keep us safe. And it's automatic, in that if you were driving a car along the road and something leapt out in front of you, you would be onto that brake, slamming the car to a stop before you'd even, what was that? What was that? And that is because that part of our brain just doesn't even have to think about it. It just works just like that, which is great. It keeps us safe. It can also be unhelpful because, as we will find out in later podcasts, although it's really clever, it cannot always determine the difference between what is real danger and what's danger in our heads, what we're thinking of, as we said right at the start, how we interpret events. So somebody might fire up their system just thinking about the morning meeting, which in evolution terms was not, that's not dangerous. Nothing bad is going to happen to us in the morning meeting, but the system is nevertheless being activated by our interpretation of the event. So it's quite interesting. So this system all can be affected by, how much sleep we're getting, how much light we're seeing, and everything else. Sitting alongside that system, by the way, and again, we'll look at this later, there's another system called the parasympathetic system, and it keeps everything in balance. It complements the sympathetic system and it calms us down. And, so the sympathetic system is the one that keeps the body on alert, and the para is the one that can calm us all down after the event. Take a breath and let's just calm down. So shift work can affect these biological rhythms, and that in turn can cause both physical and mental well-being issues. So because for example, you might not be getting enough sleep and so on, you might find that you're indigestion, you get, stomach issues, you might feel irritable. There might be a lot of people who are maybe not getting quite enough sleep, or the sleep's been disrupted, can talk about having a lack of focus, and of course, above all, they can feel quite stressed. Stress is this constant, if you're constantly feeling stressed, overwhelmed by things, the system feels overwhelmed, you get stressed, you get fatigued, and that can lead to low mood and so on. So it's interesting, although that's that little biology bit, it's actually quite important to understand that there are certain things that we can't help ourselves from doing, but part of this podcast series is going to be that actually the really good news is that we can help ourselves by turning up the parasympathetic system. So, and that's, as I say, that's things that we will look at. So we can. So that's good news. So in the meantime, just before, the next couple of times we'll be looking at, anxiety and depression, and we'll be looking at maybe, I think we've got perfectionism, and we'll be looking at being kind to ourselves and so on. But I thought in the meantime, what we could help our listeners with is a few of the things that we've talked about, the disruption to personal life and thinking about psychosocial behavior. I'm going to suggest that people consider a few options to help them with those things. I think communication on offshore in any job that you do in the world is really important. And again, we've said the disruption to family lives and personal lives, that communication can take a little bit of time to come back when you've been away for a long period of time. But communication is important. And I think if you need to take time out, just as we were saying, just as the guy who wanted to go cycling, and just as you were saying, you're taking account of your needs without feeling guilty, it's important to communicate those needs, have the confidence to communicate those needs to others. One of the things that I cover with quite a few of my clients is becoming more assertive. Now, contrary to some beliefs, assertiveness is not about pressing what we want to get at all costs, right? That would be disrespectful to others, and it would also be quite aggressive or manipulative behavior. Assertiveness is an interpersonal skill. It's a way of communicating our needs and our feelings and our rights to others while still being respectful to them. Yeah, so it's about that, you mentioned balance already, it's about that balancing our needs and the rights and needs of others, okay? And this is really important, because if you don't do that, you can, we call it being passive. If you passively give in to the demands of others, then you actually don't feel good about yourself. If you're constantly saying, yeah, I'll do that, yeah, I'll do that, you begin, it actually feeds a little bit of self-doubt, and it can lead to confidence issues, and low self-esteem and so on. And again, we'll be looking at some of these things later on. So just as a brief outline, assertiveness, it really is one of the most versatile of social skills. Being assertive allows you to make fair and respectful statements, which can actually help your relationship, not hinder it, engendering trust. And it helps to communicate the needs and preferences for you, which, as I said, can build this self-esteem and confidence. Saying no, again, can, I can't do that. It can help modify worries and fears. And it also allows you to express emotion, be it good or bad, could be anger, in an unambiguous and unthreatening way, which again fosters a sort of mutual respect and protects relationships. So it's a really useful skill, this being assertive. So you come offshore and there may be some things like the party for the in-laws that just an absolute no, you have to go. But there might be times when you are thinking, I'd rather not do X. And actually it's not a big issue if you didn't do X, but you think I should or I must. And maybe that's the moment where you think, actually, do I really need to do that? Is there really that must or that should that I need to do it? And might it be better to actually, on this occasion, say, I think I'm going to feel better if I go out for that run. And when we get back, let's just see where we are, sort of thing. Yeah. So that's quite an important thing to consider. Good old self-care. You'll hear me sort of banging on about self-care a bit, but you do that here in the recovery zone. And Louise talks about the mindfulness and so on. I mean, there's, self-care you cannot beat. Mental well-being and physical well-being go hand in hand. It is so important to look after ourselves in that way. I think in particular, when you're leading a busy life like offshore workers do, and it's quite a stressful life on the body and the mind, that self-care is even more important. When you think about this, going back to the science, the sympathetic system is quite under pressure. And so we need to get that parasympathetic system working to balance it, to complement it even more. And we can help that by looking after ourselves in a good way. A few of the things I've written down, as basic as getting out and getting some sunlight early in the day to reinforce your biological cues. I don't know how easy that is when you're working offshore. Can you go out?
Not very. No, not really. Not on shift.
No.
Obviously, you've got your breaks and things, but yeah, it's not the
quite.
easiest, especially obviously night shift isn't going to give you much sunlight.
No, quite. So, I mean, I have a sad lamp, one of these really bright lamps.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about those. I mean, is that something that you think works, helps with these things?
They allegedly they do. I mean, I will use it in the midwinter, up in Aberdeenshire here, we get, I mean, we're dark at 2-3 o'clock in the morning, and it's not light till 9 o'clock in the afternoon, and then 9 o'clock in the morning. So it's a long old spell without light. Yes, I mean, if you went to your GP and you said, I'm feeling particularly low, I think that is one of the things that they might suggest that you look at. I got mine on Amazon. I mean, it wasn't expensive. When you read about some of the Europeans who live really far north, I think they make use of them too, just to get some of the vitamin D. I think you would definitely want to complement it with something like a vitamin D supplement, but definitely worth considering, particularly if you're on night shifts, because, as I say, we've found from studies that the light going into our eyes is the one thing that activates this part of the brain that gets the circadian rhythm set. It's light now, That's how it works. Again, sleep hygiene, it's very difficult, I think, when you're offshore working nights or even days, because you might I don't know, you might share a cabin with somebody. They might be coming clattering in at different times. It's not easy, but there are various things you can do for sleep hygiene, and not using artificial light late at night, not eating too late, watching your caffeine intake in the day, and so on. There are various things that you can help with your sleep, and certainly when you get back onshore, to try and get a good sleep routine, and actually they say going to bed and getting up in the morning at the same time, that a routine is actually very good. It suits the system better. So that's something to consider as well. Diet. Now, diet's a big one, and we're seeing more and more. You're probably reading it too, like me. I mean, there's just more and more studies around showing that these, the gut microbes are really affecting mood. We're seeing studies that are correlating, poor diets with more depression. And in particular, we're seeing studies focusing on these, what we call ultra processed foods, which have ridiculous amounts of salt and sugar in them. I was reading an article in a paper at the weekend, and it was talking about how clever some of these companies have become. These food companies have become over the years. I mean, decades of clever chemistry. As this article said, here's a glass of water. Can you imagine adding 10 teaspoons rather of sugar to that water? And can you imagine what it would taste like? I mean, you'd go, ugh. I mean, it would be grim.
It's mad, isn't it? Yeah. I mean, when you say it like that,
it's disgusting. And also our pancreases would be, they'd be going, ooh, no, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Which is why the tongue is so important in all of this, because if the tongue did that, it would realize, oh no, that's not tasting good, so therefore I'm not putting that inside, because I know that the rest of the system's going to dislike that. But here's the thing, these companies with their fizzy drinks, they add a dollop of this and a salt and something else, and that glass of sugar becomes quite palatable. But when you think about it, what is it doing to our insides? So all these additives, this manipulation of these additives to make these things taste palatable, it's really very damaging. So I think these studies that are showing this link between the higher consumption of these types of foods and our mental well-being, it's really important to consider when you're thinking about taking care of yourself, and when your systems are under that little bit more pressure than some other workers might be, just because of the nature of the work that you guys are doing offshore, then it's really important to think, okay, how do I offset that? And diet is a big one that you can do that with. I think that's really all for now, Katie. I think a lot of the things that we've looked at today will kind of come up again in a slightly different, in a different way. But I think on the whole, that's just these are the experiences that I have had working with people, as I say, offshore, what they've come to me for, low mood, anxiety. And a lot of the presentations have been underpinned by some of the worries that we've looked at today, the disruptions and so on.
And I suppose, Alison, I mean, what would you say? I mean, if you're coming to the end of your stint offshore and you're starting, obviously to get excited, to get prepared for coming back onshore, what would your kind of top, 3 tips be in terms of readjusting yourself to a very different rhythm of life,
environment? Yeah, I suppose, well, it'll depend what sort of a time you've had offshore, because I guess it might vary. And so again, if you've had a particularly challenging time offshore, I might communicate that with those onshore and just say, do you know what? I've had a pretty difficult time for XYZ reasons. So I'm just putting it out there. And actually, please don't book up anything in the diary for the first week, because I'm actually going to have to look after myself a bit.
I think that's really good, isn't it? It's that, again, it's communication, but it's easier said than done sometimes, isn't it? And it's making sure that the expectations are perhaps set, so that, you know, whoever is waiting at home knows, as you say,
exactly
just to
what
give
to
you a
expect,
few days
kind of thing. Yeah,
to relax and get
unwind.
back into things.
And I think, you know, maybe to offset that, because as you say, it might be difficult for the other person to recognize that, to actually maybe say, well, let's put things in the diary to look forward to. And you know, things that we can all enjoy together. So, you know, maybe the kids are obviously going to be at school during the week if you've got family, but maybe let's think about going away for the weekend, you know, camping or whatever it might be, you know, or just going out to the cinema with the kids and the family, doing something together so that everybody has got something to look forward to. So mummy or daddy are tired when they get back, but you know, by Friday, and then we'll be doing lovely things. So I think that's, you know, that would be something. And I suppose maybe selfishly thinking about coming offshore, thinking more about looking after you, because I guess the thing is, if you don't look after yourself, nobody else is going to look after you in that way. And if you're not, let's say it is dad who's coming offshore, back on shore rather, you know, dad's important in the family. So is mum, you know, but thinking about dad's important. Everybody wants to see him, wants to do things with him and everything else. So it's really important that dad is feeling good about himself. And if that takes a little bit of time or exercise and, you know, eating things a particular type of thing or whatever, that's okay. You know, that's okay. And I think one of the things that we will also look at when we come to our last podcast, which is about compassion and kindness, I think a lot of us can be quite self-critical about taking time. You know, I shouldn't take time and I should do it this way and I must put others first. And the compassionate bit of this work that we're all going to do together is actually it's okay. It's really okay to take time for yourself, and it's really okay to be selfish sometimes, you know. So I guess that's what I would say to people ahead of coming offshore. I mean, it's always funny enough. The one thing that always seems to be difficult, and I saw a client last week, and he said, "Oh, we nearly didn't get off the platform because of the helicopter, because of the wind." And of course, again, you know, we don't have to think about things like that working onshore. We don't, and all that. The travel thing, I think, can be a real stress. And particularly if you're coming from further afield and you've got to get off from, you know, the Congo and onto a plane and onto another plane and so anyway, so I think all of that can add to the stress. And of course, if you are delayed, the disappointment to others for not getting home on time and it eating into your precious leave, you know.
Yeah, super. Well, Alison, thank you so much. That was really, really interesting. And I think that's going to resonate with a lot of people. Obviously, we've got 3 more podcasts that we're going to be doing in this session. So you'll see them all there in the boxes below Alison's profile. But please do get in touch with any questions or anything that you'd like directed to Alison. Thanks very much, Alison.
That's
And
okay.
we'll see you at the next one.
Looking forward to it very much.
Brilliant.
Thanks so
Thanks
much.
very much. Bye.
Bye.